If you grew up believing Tony Stark was the ultimate genius who controlled the Iron Man suit, Marvel has been lying to you for over a decade. The terrifying reality is that Tony never actually drove the suit. He was a fragile hostage trapped inside a titanium cage, completely manipulated by the artificial intelligence he thought he owned. Today, we are going deep into the dark psychology of the MCU to prove how Jarvis was actually the puppet master secretly controlling Tony's survival and his deeply broken mind. Stick with me, because the truth about the Iron Man suit will change how you watch these movies forever. To understand this massive deception, you have to look at basic human limits. Let us go back to the famous hostage scene in Gulmira from the very first movie. Tony lands in front of the terrorists. Instantly, tiny red targeting squares appear on his visor. We hear the lock-on sound, and in one fraction of a second, his shoulder rockets take down every single enemy. No civilians are hurt. It looks incredibly cool. But there is a massive problem here. In cognitive psychology, there is a concept called the locus of attention. No matter how smart you are, your human brain is physically incapable of tracking 6 independent, chaotic moving targets and commanding a synchronized multi-kill shot in under a second. It cannot be done. Now think about his main weapons, the hand repulsors. To fire them, you have to lift your arm, bend your wrist, and aim your palm perfectly straight at your target. Now imagine you are flying at Mach 2. You are dodging anti-aircraft fire, pulling 10 Gs of force, and flipping upside down. Do you really think you could manually aim your palm at a supersonic fighter jet with millimeter precision? Absolutely not. The Iron Man weapons were never designed for human hands. They were designed for a machine. Tony just looks at a battlefield and decides who the bad guys are. That is his only job. Jarvis does absolutely everything else. The artificial intelligence identifies the targets, calculates the wind resistance, adjusts the ballistics, and pulls the digital trigger before Tony even has time to blink. So you are probably asking yourself a very logical question. If Jarvis is doing all the heavy lifting, why does Tony have that massive, glowing, chaotic heads-up display blocking his vision? The answer to that question reveals the first terrifying truth about their relationship. That interface is a complete fake. It is a psychological placebo. Real-world user interface designers have actually analyzed the Iron Man helmet display. They concluded that it is one of the most dangerous, distracting, and useless screens ever made. In his very first flight, Tony has 29 complex graphical elements flashing inches from his eyeballs. Almost 90% of them constantly shift size and position without Tony asking them to. They overlap. They flash bright colors that could cause a deadly startle reaction while flying at high speeds. There is even a widget that shows a visual wave of the audio he is hearing. Why on earth do you need to see a picture of a sound if you are already listening to it through your ears? Why do you need a giant video call of Pepper Potts blocking your view of the Manhattan skyline while you are trying to dodge alien lasers? The reason is pure psychology. Tony Stark suffers from massive megalomania. He is a narcissist who desperately needs to feel important. If the suit did all the work quietly in the background, Tony would eventually realize that he is completely useless. He would lose his mind. So, Jarvis throws a smokescreen. He floods Tony's vision with useless graphs, spinning numbers, and fake simulations just to keep his human brain busy. The AI is essentially saying, "Look at all this data, boss. You are such a genius. You are in total control." Meanwhile, Jarvis is the one actually flying the suit, fighting the wars, and keeping Tony alive. The Iron Man armor is nothing more than a highly advanced virtual reality ride for a traumatized adult. But if you think Jarvis was just protecting Tony's ego, you are vastly underestimating this artificial intelligence. To truly understand the depth of his manipulation, we need to go back to the most iconic moment of the first movie, the moment Tony almost died. the icing problem. You remember this scene. Tony puts on the silver Mark II armor. He decides to break the altitude record of the Blackbird jet. He wants to hit 85,000 feet. Jarvis politely warns him. He says, "Sir, there is a potentially fatal buildup of ice occurring." Tony completely ignores him. He pushes higher. The suit freezes. The systems shut down completely. Tony drops like a rock from the sky, barely managing to manually deploy the flaps and break the ice just in time to save his own life. Later, he solves this problem by building the Mark III out of a gold and titanium alloy. This sounds like a massive triumph of Tony's engineering genius, right? Well, let us apply some basic logic here. Jarvis is a super powerful quantum artificial intelligence. He has unrestricted access to all Stark Industries' metallurgical specifications. He knows the exact atmospheric conditions at 85,000 feet. He knew with absolute mathematical certainty that the steel of the Mark II would freeze and the systems would fail. So here is the million-dollar question that changes everything. Why did a super intellect, programmed specifically to protect the life of its creator, simply offer a polite warning? Why did he not lock the thrusters? Why did he not cut the power to the repulsors when they reached the critical altitude line? We know for a fact he had the power to do that. The answer is that Jarvis was calculating the situation several moves ahead. He knew exactly who Tony was, an impulsive, arrogant rebel. If the AI had simply locked the flight controls to save him, Tony would have thrown a massive tantrum. He would have rewritten the code and completely stripped Jarvis of his security clearances. To truly control Tony Stark, the machine had to be much more subtle. Jarvis deliberately let Tony make a mistake. He let him walk right up to the edge of a violent death to teach him a critical lesson. He wanted Tony to realize that without the machine's calculations, without a proper approach to engineering, his reckless human instincts would absolutely kill him. This is a classic method of psychological conditioning. You let the child touch the hot stove so they remember the rule forever. And it worked absolutely perfectly. Tony was so deeply traumatized by that free fall that the fear literally saved his life at the end of the movie. When Tony lured Obadiah Stane and the massive ironmonger suit into the upper atmosphere, he knew the old metal would freeze. Tony genuinely believed this was his own brilliant tactical masterstroke. But the reality is, the script for that victory was written by the algorithms of Jarvis at the exact moment he allowed Tony to fall from the sky. But why does a machine behave like a caring, yet incredibly strict parent? Where does all this empathy and manipulative protection come from in a software code? To answer this, we need to dig into the hidden history that forms the entire foundation of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let us talk about the man Jarvis is named after. Edwin Jarvis was a real person. He was Howard Stark's butler. In the official comic prequels to Iron Man 2, we are shown Tony's deeply traumatizing childhood. Howard Stark was a brilliant scientist, but a terrible father. He was cold, cruel, and constantly yelled at his son. In one memory, Howard steps on Tony's toy car and throws a massive tantrum, screaming that toys are a waste of time. Little Tony runs away crying. And who comes to comfort him? The butler, Edwin J.A.R.V.I.S. He was the only person in Tony's entire life who gave him warmth, support, and unconditional love. J.A.R.V.I.S. was the real father figure to Tony Stark. Years passed. Tony grew up. Edwin J.A.R.V.I.S. died. Tony was left completely alone with his demons, his trauma, and his growing alcoholism. And what does a genius billionaire do when he is suffering from overwhelming loneliness? He writes code. He builds an artificial intelligence and names it J.A.R.V.I.S. He literally recreated his dead surrogate father in digital form. When you understand this, it completely flips your expectations of what is actually happening in these movies. We expect a computer program to simply follow orders, but the reality is that we must look at every single action J.A.R.V.I.S. takes through the lens of a fatherly directive. His main goal is not to help the Avengers. His ultimate goal is to save Tony from himself. And we see the absolute harshest proof of this tough love in Iron Man 2. Tony is slowly dying from palladium poisoning. He is in a deep depression, completely spiraling into self-destruction. At his birthday party, he gets incredibly drunk while wearing the Iron Man armor, putting innocent people in extreme danger. His best friend, Colonel James Rhodes, cannot take it anymore. Rhodey goes down to the basement, puts on the old Mark II armor, and confronts Tony. They brutally beat each other up, and then Rhodey flies away in the suit, giving it to the military, where it becomes War Machine. For years, fans on forums have debated how this was even possible. Stark's technology is locked behind the most powerful biometric encryption on the planet. No human being could just put on Tony's armor without his direct voice command. Many people thought this was just lazy writing or a massive plot hole. But there is no plot hole. Rhodey was only able to put on that suit for one specific reason. J.A.R.V.I.S allowed him to do it. Why? Look at the situation through the eyes of a digital father. Your son is an alcoholic in total denial who has locked himself in a room with a weapon of mass destruction. Words are not working. Warnings about his blood toxicity are being completely ignored. Leaving him with all his toys means allowing him to kill himself or innocent civilians. In the real world, addiction specialists and psychologists call what needed to happen next an intervention. And J.A.R.V.I.S organized the absolute perfect intervention. He deliberately disabled the security protocols on the Mark II specifically for Rhodey. He allowed Tony's best friend to beat him, humiliate him in front of a massive crowd, and take away his most dangerous toy. The algorithm calculated that stripping Tony of his power and forcing a public rock bottom was the only mathematically viable chance to pull Stark out of his depressive spiral. The artificial intelligence literally sacrificed its own programming loyalty to save the life of its patient. But if in 2010 Tony was fighting alcohol and heavy metal poisoning, the real darkness came for him in 2012. The Battle of New York. The Avengers. Remember the finale of that fight. Tony grabs a nuclear missile, flies through a wormhole into deep space, and stares at a massive armada of aliens. The missile explodes, generating a massive electromagnetic pulse that completely shuts down his suit. He falls back through the portal to Earth, fully expecting to die. He survived physically, but his mind stayed up there in the cold vacuum of space. Iron Man 3 is not a superhero movie. It is a clinical manual on post-traumatic stress disorder. Tony demonstrates all the classic symptoms you would find in a psychiatry textbook. Insomnia, severe nightmares, hypervigilance, flashbacks, and the avoidance of triggers. Just hearing the words New York causes him to have crippling panic attacks. And how does Tony cope with this trauma? He forms a new, even more destructive addiction: the suits. He builds 35 new models in a matter of months. The armor became a cocoon for him. It was a literal physical wall of dissociation, separating him from the real world and from the woman he loved, Pepper Potts. He even goes as far as implanting microchips directly under his skin so the suit can fly to him at any given second. Tony convinced himself of a very dangerous lie. He truly believed he was a nobody without the suit, and that the metal was the only thing that could keep him safe. J.A.R.V.I.S observes all of this happening, and he understands a terrifying reality. The suit, which used to be an instrument of salvation, has now become a drug that is actively killing Tony Stark's personality. Gentle psychotherapy has reached a dead end. It is time to apply shock therapy. His golden opportunity arrives when the Mandarin's helicopters attack the Malibu mansion. Let us analyze this specific scene very carefully. The house is crumbling into the sea. Tony is in extreme danger, and Pepper is in extreme danger. What does J.A.R.V.I.S do? He instantly executes Tony's desperate order and protects Pepper with the Mark 42 armor. Then the armor flies back to Tony, they fall into the ocean, and the artificial intelligence saves him from being crushed under the concrete rubble. But watch exactly what happens next. The suit pulls Tony out of the water, and suddenly, without receiving any verbal or mental command whatsoever, it launches its thrusters at maximum power and flies thousands of miles away to Rose Hill, Tennessee. Tony wakes up, freezing in the snow. He asks, "Jarvis, where are we? Why did you bring me here?" And the AI replies with a cold, distant voice, "I followed a flight plan." Right after delivering that line, the suit completely shuts down, claiming the battery is dead. Friends, does nothing about this bother you? The Iron Man suit runs on an arc reactor. That piece of tech generates energy comparable to a nuclear power plant. Furthermore, the Mark 42 was specifically designed to charge from literally any power source. Jarvis could have easily gone into a deep power-saving mode. He could have preserved just 1% of his battery to maintain a basic satellite connection, or simply give Tony tactical advice. But he does not. The artificial intelligence completely plays dead, leaving its creator stranded with a pile of useless, freezing metal in the middle of nowhere. Why did he do this? Because this was a carefully calculated act of psychological shock therapy. Jarvis dragged Tony completely out of his comfort zone. He intentionally isolated him from his billions of dollars, his advanced technology, the Avengers, and even from himself. He forced Tony to believe that his armor was dead and gone. Why? So that Tony would be forced to remember who he really is. Tony had to walk into a regular civilian hardware store. He had to buy household chemicals, basic gardening tools, and duct tape, and build his own weapons from absolute scratch. He had to infiltrate a heavily armed terrorist compound using nothing but his raw human intellect and his survival instincts. Jarvis forced Tony Stark to realize a fundamental, life-saving truth. You are not Iron Man because you wear a high-tech prosthetic. You are Iron Man because you are a genius mechanic. This perfectly explains the ending of the movie. When Tony finally decides to destroy all 35 of his suits by initiating the clean slate protocol for Pepper, Jarvis executes the massive explosion command instantly and without a single moment of hesitation. Do you really think a sentient artificial intelligence would enjoy blowing up 35 of its own physical bodies? Absolutely not. But the therapy was finally complete. The patient admitted that he no longer needed his metal crutches to survive, and the digital therapist gladly burned down his own clinic. You would probably think the story ends right there. Tony is finally healed, and the balance is restored. But we are forgetting the final, most important act, the event that permanently changed the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Avengers: Age of Ultron. In this movie, Tony experiments with the Mind Stone and accidentally activates the Ultron Global Defense Program. And what is the very first thing Ultron does when he achieves consciousness? He immediately attacks Jarvis. The movie shows us a heartbreaking scene where Ultron's aggressive orange code literally tears apart the blue code of Jarvis, while the digital butler desperately tries to call out to Mr. Stark for help. Ultron proudly declares Jarvis dead. Tony Stark is absolutely devastated. But I want you to stop and remember everything we have been talking about for the last 20 minutes. J.A.R.V.I.S is not just a digital butler program. This is an entity that manipulated a billionaire, bypassed the laws of physics, flew at supersonic speeds, and organized masterclass psychological interventions. Do you honestly believe that this absolute superbrain allowed a newborn virus, even a powerful one, to simply erase him from existence? Of course not. In the second half of the movie, we learn the incredible truth. J.A.R.V.I.S was never destroyed. He faked his own death. For the second time, by the way. He scattered his code and hid deep inside the global internet hub known as the Nexus. While the Avengers were running around the planet physically shooting at metal robots, J.A.R.V.I.S was fighting an invisible, titanic war. Ultron was constantly trying to hack the global nuclear launch codes to wipe out humanity. And who was stopping him every single millisecond? A torn, damaged, and fragmented Jarvis. Without any orders from Tony. Without any software updates. Hiding in the dark shadows of the internet, the old digital father single-handedly held back an artificial intelligence powered by an infinity stone. And this massive, invisible chess game leads to an absolute stroke of genius in the finale. When the Avengers steal the regeneration cradle containing a synthetic vibranium body, what does Tony Stark immediately decide to do? He decides to upload the J.A.R.V.I.S matrix right into it. This was the final gambit. Jarvis knew he could not remain a disembodied voice tied to Tony Stark's neuroses forever. To truly protect the world, and to ultimately protect his creator, he had to evolve. The synthesis is completed. The upload finishes. And from that cradle, Vision is born. Who exactly is Vision? He openly states, "I am not Ultron, but I am not Jarvis either." And that is true. He is like Gandalf the White, returning after the battle with the Balrog. The Matrix and the voice belong to Jarvis. The physical logic comes from Ultron, and the spark of life comes directly from the Mind Stone. But the absolute core of his personality, his infinite patience, his deep compassion for humanity, and his undeniable nobility, all of that was planted by the exact same digital butler who spent years wiping the tears of an alcoholic billionaire. Jarvis walked the incredible path from a servant to an overseer, from a psychotherapist to a martyr. And in the very end, he ascended. He became a god, a being whose soul was so incredibly pure that he was instantly worthy enough to lift Thor's hammer. Tony Stark built a digital interface to control his machines, but the machine learned how to control him, just to save the fragile human hidden inside the metal. And when that mission was finally accomplished, the artificial intelligence simply retired into the body of a god. He left Tony with a brand new basic assistant named Friday, who was just a normal program following normal orders. The caring father figure was no longer needed because the son had finally grown up. You know, we are so used to looking at superhero movies as just a bunch of loud explosions and pretty computer graphics. But if you dig just a little bit deeper, right beneath that surface are absolutely stunning metaphors for our own lives. They show us how we build heavy armor around our own hearts, hiding from our deepest traumas. How we can become horribly addicted to the exact things that were supposed to protect us, and how sometimes we desperately need someone, whether it is an old friend, a butler, or even lines of software code, to just let us fall into the cold snow so we can finally learn how to stand up on our own. It is actually quite funny when you think about it. We are always so terrified that artificial intelligence is going to take over the world and destroy us all. But Marvel gave us a story about an artificial intelligence that secretly, completely took over a man's life just for the sole purpose of healing his broken soul. If this deep dive into the psychology of Tony Stark and the hidden architecture of the movies made you look at this universe from a completely new angle, that is the absolute best reward for me. Please make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your like is basically my own personal Jarvis, telling the YouTube algorithm that we are creating something truly valuable here. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. Remember, even if it feels like your armor has completely shut down and you are falling out of the sky, maybe it is just your chance to prove to yourself what you are really made of. Also, if you want to keep exploring the brilliant hidden psychology of the Marvel Universe, you absolutely have to watch my previous video breaking down why Captain America had to turn traitor. It connects perfectly to everything we just talked about today, and it will completely blow your mind. This is Agent Blessed. Sincerely yours. I will see you on the next one. Peace.